Christina Shawn was born in September 1976 in the American city of New Orleans. Her parents dedicated their lives to military service, so the family often had to relocate, moving from one military base to another, both within the country and abroad. These constant changes of environment allowed the girl to learn about the world from a young age, meet new people and their cultures, and develop communication skills. At the same time, the need to constantly adapt to new living conditions inevitably caused stress. However, Christina seemed to overcome any difficulties with ease, only tempering her character. Eventually, the family settled in the town of Biloxi, Mississippi. It was here, at a more conscious age, that Christina discovered her love for the culinary arts. The teenage girl enjoyed cooking, and it became her way of supporting her parents, who, due to their busy work schedules, did not always have the opportunity to prepare food themselves. Christina eagerly studied cooking magazines and newspapers, mastering the secrets of the craft, and later even began to create her own unique dishes. However, cooking was not the girl's only passion. After graduating from high school, on the advice of her parents, she decided to continue her education and moved to Los Angeles, where she enrolled in the Academy of Dramatic Arts. During her studies, which ended in 2000, Christina repeatedly participated in theatrical productions and even managed to star in episodic roles in Hollywood films, in particular, as a stuntwoman in the movie Terminator, Genesis. Christina stood out not only for her beauty, but also for her athletic physique, sociability, self-confidence, and diverse talents. She easily found common ground with others and knew how to present herself in the best light. In her free time, the girl preferred active outdoor recreation. Over time, this hobby grew into something more. Christina realized what she wanted to do in life. Thanks to her dedication to a healthy lifestyle, she decided to devote herself to helping other people, motivating them to follow proper nutrition and engage in fitness. Christina herself served as a living example that such an approach is the key to a harmonious life. The girl actively promoted the rejection of bad habits. It was these interests which completely captivated Christina in adulthood that prompted her to dream of her own catering company. She planned to organize catering at themed events and parties, offering guests healthy and delicious dishes, a format typical for the early 2000s. In 2005, Christina officially registered her business and enthusiastically immersed herself in work. Through her business, she actively popularized the ideas of using environmentally friendly products and materials, positioning her own brand as completely natural and beneficial. Cristie had even more ambitious plans. Another of her cherished dreams was to create a self-sufficient farm that could provide people with food with minimal interference in natural processes. The girl devoted many years to developing these ideas while continuing to pursue her other favorite activities. In 2012, Cristie became a finalist in the 8th season of a popular television cooking show, but she failed to win. She usually accepted defeat with dignity, but this time she felt that she had been treated unfairly. In her opinion, the jury misunderstood and misjudged her original approach to cooking, which caused her strong indignation. However, Cristie was not going to give up and was determined to prove to everyone that she was capable of pursuing her goal despite the obstacles. Later, the unpleasant impressions from this incident faded, and Cristie threw herself into her usual affairs with renewed vigor. She continued to develop her catering business while participating in the filming of other culinary television programs. It was on one of these projects that fate brought her together with Joseph Coate, who was engaged in casting actors and participants for various shows. The man fell in love with the charming blonde at first sight. At first, a friendly relationship developed between them, which gradually grew into a mutual romantic attraction. Joseph fully supported Cristie and believed in the great prospects of her ideas and aspirations. Later, the couple decided to start a new life together and fulfill their dream of having their own farm. They left California, sold the catering company, and moved to the cozy town of Leicester in North Carolina, with a population of just under 12,000 people. At that time, the couple was already planning to start a family, so they took care to purchase a spacious plot of land. They became the owners of 36 acres, which was ideal for building the farm of their dreams and fulfilling their plans for the future, including having children. In September 2014, the couple officially formalized their relationship by exchanging wedding vows at the local community center, surrounded by their closest friends and family. Despite the move, Joseph continued to work remotely in television. From the outside, the Coate couple seemed like the perfect match, both bright, ambitious, and harmoniously complementing each other. Thanks to their talents, they had grand plans for the future. At the beginning of 2015, their lives changed dramatically. Cristie became pregnant, and the couple eagerly awaited the birth of their firstborn, a girl they decided to name Skylar. It seemed that everything in their life was going as well as possible. The young family was actively preparing for the new addition, as Cristie's pregnancy had already reached the 5th month. However, this story will not have a happy ending. The idyll lasted only until March 2015, when worried relatives suddenly found it impossible to contact either 38-year-old Cristie or 45-year-old Joseph by phone. The calendar showed March 15, 2015, when the alarmed relatives of Joseph and Cristie had been trying in vain to reach the couple by phone for several days in a row. All their attempts to contact them by phone proved futile. Since the relatives lived a considerable distance from the couple's home, they were unable to visit in person and check if everything was all right with the young family. So they turned to Cecilia, a close friend of Cristie's who lived nearby, for help. The girl agreed to visit the couple's house to find out the reasons for their silence. Upon arriving at the scene, Cecilia was alarmed by the oppressive silence that reigned around. Joseph and Cristie's cars were parked in the yard, but the owners themselves did not respond to knocking on the door or loud calls. Looking through the windows, her friend could not see any signs of the presence of either the husband or the wife. There was an eerie impression that they had simply vanished into thin air. The situation seemed extremely strange because their beloved dogs remained inside the house. Cristie treated her pets like children and would never leave them unattended under any circumstances. Even in the case of short-term trips on business, she always made sure to arrange for someone to take care of the animals. However, this time, what was happening did not fit at all with the usual way of life of the young couple. According to their plans, Cristie had no scheduled trips for that date. At 5 months pregnant, the woman led a predominantly domestic lifestyle and rarely left the confines of her own home. After carefully examining the house, Cecilia noticed signs of a break-in on the back door, which she immediately reported to the relatives of the missing couple. After that, Cristie's parents did not hesitate to file a missing persons report with the police regarding their daughter and son-in-law. When the patrol officers arrived on the call, they found the doors open and made sure that no one was inside. The law enforcement officers suspected that the couple might have been victims of abduction, so the house was immediately sealed off to preserve potential evidence. In order to get at least some clue, the detectives made a request to the mobile operator regarding incoming and outgoing calls from the missing couple's phones. It turned out that in recent days, Joseph and Cristie had not made any calls, which only confirmed the worst fears of their loved ones. The last recorded calls were dated March 10 and 11, and none of them aroused suspicion. The couple communicated exclusively with friends and relatives. A thorough inspection of the scene revealed traces in the house that indicated an intrusion and probable abduction of the owners. Some valuables had disappeared, but no significant clues were found that would shed light on the identity of the perpetrator. Unfortunately, the criminal did not leave behind any fingerprints or biological traces. The investigation, having barely begun, was already reaching a dead end. The news of this event shook the small community of the town. Neighbors began actively discussing among themselves possible versions of what could have happened to the successful and attractive couple. Some of them recalled how on March 13 they saw a stranger throwing an extremely bulky and heavy-looking black bag into a garbage container near the house of the missing couple, after which he quickly walked away. Unfortunately, the garbage from the bins was soon taken out, so it was no longer possible to examine the contents of the mysterious bag. The identity of the man who disposed of the garbage bag was quickly established. He turned out to be 36-year-old Robert Owens, who lived near the Coate couple's home and worked various odd jobs, including in the yard of the missing couple. In addition, he was a close friend of Cristie and Joseph, often communicated with them, and was even a guest at their wedding. This information attracted the close attention of the investigators, and on March 16, Robert was called in for questioning. However, at the police station, he firmly denied any involvement in the disappearance of his friends. Meanwhile, while the suspect was being interrogated, the police managed to find the same garbage bag that the man had thrown away near the house of the missing couple. Its contents turned out to be quite telling: charred fragments of things, some of which resembled the remains of Cristie and Joseph's clothes. The find only heightened the detectives' suspicions about Robert's possible involvement in the crime. When the investigators informed Robert about the discovery of the garbage bag, he instantly became confused and began to get tangled up in his own testimony. Eventually, under the pressure of the evidence, the man confessed to the crime. According to him, on March 12, 2015, he was heading to Joseph's house, intending to perform some work. But on the way, his car ended up in a ditch near the couple's house. Robert walked the rest of the way and asked his friends to help pull out his pickup truck. Cristie and Joseph readily agreed, and together they all headed to the scene of the incident. While the owners were pushing the car from the outside, their friend tried to start the engine and move from the spot. However, as Robert confessed, at some point, the unforeseeable happened. He accidentally ran over the couple. By pressing the gas pedal, the man hit Cristie and Joseph, causing them to fall and lose consciousness. In a panic, Robert accidentally pressed the gas again, running over his friends' bodies a second time. The suspect insisted that it was an accident, but at that moment, he was afraid that he would not be believed and would inevitably be accused of intentional murder. In the end, Robert made the fatal decision not to call the police or an ambulance. Cristie and Joseph were lying motionless and showing no signs of life, but instead of trying to help them, the man decided to get rid of the bodies and destroy all traces of the crime. He loaded the lifeless bodies of his friends into his pickup truck and took them to his own home. There, in the bathroom, Robert mutilated Joseph's body with an electric saw. He put the man's body parts in plastic bags and temporarily left Cristie's body in the bedroom before doing the same to her. After that, the killer tried to destroy the remains as much as possible by burning the body fragments in the stove located in his kitchen. Robert committed all these horrific actions in order to conceal the traces of the brutal crime. After listening to the chilling details of the confession, the detectives immediately went to the suspect's house with a search warrant. There, in the stove, they found severely burnt bone fragments belonging to Cristie and Joseph. Robert had not managed to completely get rid of the terrible evidence. In addition, traces of blood and biological material of the deceased couple were found on the electric saw, in the bathroom, bedroom, and on the kitchen stove. All these findings fully confirmed the truthfulness of Robert's confession regarding the dismemberment of the bodies. Without wasting time, that same night, the suspect was arrested. He was charged with the intentional murder of 2 people, as well as the unborn child, unlawful entry, and burglary. Robert did not deny his guilt in the crimes committed, but when the investigators asked him why he did not immediately report the incident to the police if it was an accident, he could not answer. His story seemed extremely unconvincing and raised reasonable doubts. The detectives did not believe the version about the accidental running over of the couple and suspected that Robert was trying to hide something. This prompted them to study the personality of the detainee more thoroughly. In the course of further investigation, law enforcement officers managed to establish Robert's probable involvement in another crime committed 15 years ago, when his close friend disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Delving into the suspect's past, the police stumbled upon another chilling secret of brutal murder with a similar modus operandi. Zepp Quinn, Robert's friend, was born in 1981. It seemed that this young man had a brilliant future ahead of him. While still in school, he enrolled in military training courses and planned to join the United States Air Force immediately after graduation. Zepp was characterized as a caring and friendly guy. At the time of his disappearance, he was working at a local Walmart supermarket. Zepp lived in the city of Asheville, North Carolina, where he met Robert Owens, the future killer of the Code couple. One January evening in 2000, Zepp finished his work shift at 9 p.m. He was going to go on a short trip with his friend Robert so that he could buy a new car. However, Zepp did not return home that night. His mother had an uneasy feeling that something was wrong. The woman had good reason to believe that her son did not plan to leave home for long. After all, Zepp did not take with him his wallet with money, a change of clothes, or the solution for his contact lenses, which he could not do without. Everything indicated that he intended to return as soon as possible. However, neither the next morning nor even a day later, Zepp still did not return home. The alarmed mother of the young man turned to the police with a statement about her son's disappearance. But despite all the efforts of law enforcement officers, it was not possible to find any useful information about his whereabouts. The detectives carefully studied the surveillance camera recordings that could have captured the movements of the missing person on the day of his disappearance. However, Zepp was last seen on video only at 9:15 p.m. when he entered a small store with a stranger to buy a soft drink. Later, this mysterious companion was recognized as Robert Owens, the very person with whom Zepp went on that fateful trip. Surveillance cameras recorded Zepp getting into his light blue Mazda, while Robert settled behind the wheel of a Ford pickup truck. The cars left the parking lot one after the other, after which the young man's trail broke off. He seemed to have vanished into thin air. Naturally, the investigators had a number of questions for Robert, as he was the last one who communicated with the missing person and probably could shed light on his subsequent fate. During a conversation with detectives, Robert tried to recreate the events that took place after the cars disappeared from the camera's field of view. According to him, shortly after leaving the store, he and Zepp parted ways because Robert received a short message on his pager with a job offer. In order to discuss the potential order in more detail, the man was forced to leave for a while and find the nearest payphone. So he gave Zepp a conventional signal with his headlights, and both cars stopped on the side of the road. Robert explained the situation to his friend and asked him to wait a bit while he settled all the issues, after which he went about his business. As Robert claimed, he dealt with his affairs quite quickly, in about 10 minutes, and was already going to return to the place where he had left his friend. However, according to his own confession, it was not that simple. The man said that during that period, he was suffering from depression and was taking medications prescribed by a doctor, which sometimes caused him to have a depressed state and a somewhat distorted perception of reality. It seems that this is exactly what happened that fatal evening. Robert described his condition at that time as extremely agitated and confused, as if he was completely losing control of himself. According to the suspect's version, when he was approaching the agreed meeting place, he lost control of the vehicle and his pickup truck flew into a ditch. Despite all his attempts, Robert could not pull the car out on his own. However, realizing that he was near the place where Zepp was waiting for him, the man decided to walk the rest of the way. Trying once again to cope with the blocked vehicle, Robert suddenly noticed that a car very similar to his 18-year-old friend's car drove past him, but the driver did not stop or even slow down. Robert had no way to catch up with or pursue the car without his own vehicle. Thus, according to the suspect, he had no idea where Zepp could have gone and what had happened to him. The subsequent chronology of events in Robert's account seemed extremely vague and confused. It is only known that on the same night, he ended up in the hospital, allegedly due to an accident, which, however, was in no way connected with Zepp's disappearance at least. This is the version voiced by the man. However, no confirmation of his words could be found according to police reports. No accidents were recorded in the county that night. Robert claimed that as a result of the accident, he received quite serious injuries, broken ribs, and a concussion. According to him, he sustained these injuries a few hours after Zepp's disappearance. The suspect's story revealed many gaps and inconsistencies, which gave the impression that he was simply making up details on the fly to confuse the police. Soon, Robert was recognized as the main suspect in this case, as he had no convincing alibi and was the last person who had contact with the missing young man. However, the investigators did not immediately manage to break Robert during interrogations to bring charges. They needed more substantial evidence than just suspicions. Therefore, a primary task was to find either the missing boy or at least his car. It is worth noting that in the early 2000s, the investigation of such crimes was much more difficult than it is today. Law enforcement officers did not have the technical capabilities to quickly establish the whereabouts of a suspect or victim or track their telephone conversations. Instant messaging services were also just beginning to gain popularity and were not under the supervision of special services. There were also very few street surveillance cameras. In fact, all hope was placed on random witnesses who could provide any information about the events of that evening. But unfortunately, none could be found. Later, new persons of interest were added to the list of suspects, among them Massey Taylor and her ex-boyfriend. As it turned out, Massey had started dating Zepp shortly before his mysterious disappearance. 2 weeks before these events, the young people accidentally met in one of the local restaurants and had been communicating ever since. At that time, the girl had just broken up with her previous boyfriend, Wesley Smith. Rumor had it that their relationship was not without manifestations of physical and psychological violence on the part of the ex-partner. According to witnesses, Zepp, having learned about Massey's problems with her former partner, expressed a desire to intervene and help the girl. One day, he even showed up at her work just at the moment when Wesley was there. The young man intended to personally talk to the offender of his new friend, as she was clearly not indifferent to him. A heated argument broke out between Zepp and Wesley, which nearly turned into a fight. Several eyewitnesses heard Massey's enraged ex-boyfriend openly threaten to settle scores with his rival. It was quite obvious that he had a motive to get rid of Zepp. However, during interrogations at the police station, both Massey and Wesley firmly denied any involvement in Zepp's disappearance. The alibis of both were thoroughly checked, and eventually, the investigation concluded that they were not involved in this case. Therefore, the investigation and search for the missing boy continued. 4 days after his disappearance, Zepp's abandoned light blue Mazda was found. One of the employees who worked with the boy's mother called her and reported that he had seen the familiar car in a parking lot near the hospital. The car had obviously been abandoned under strange circumstances. The headlights were still on, and the doors were unlocked. After carefully examining the interior of the car, police experts were able to find several personal belongings of the missing owner, including a plastic card for using payphones. Also found in the car were several empty drink bottles and an unknown man's jacket, which definitely did not belong to Zepp. It was not possible to establish who owned this item of clothing, which was lying on the back seat. Interestingly, an inscription made with women's lipstick was found on the windshield of the car. The detectives made every effort to analyze the collected evidence, but this did not yield the desired results. It was impossible to track where and when Zepp's phone card was last used. Experts could not find traces of DNA or fingerprints on any of the items found in the car that would belong to anyone other than the vehicle's owner. The police managed to find several witnesses who claimed to have seen a young girl behind the wheel of the Mazda. Judging by their descriptions, she looked very much like Massey Taylor, Zepp's girlfriend. However, it was not possible to prove her involvement in the events of that night, as Massey had a reliable alibi. Despite all the difficulties, one rather interesting fact did come to light during the investigation. Shortly before his disappearance, Zepp sent a mysterious message to his aunt's pager. Unfortunately, the woman was unable to view it right away, as she had just gone to dinner at the home of Massey's mother, with whom she was friends. This unfortunate coincidence prevented her from finding out what her nephew was trying to convey in the last hours before his disappearance. Returning late in the evening from her friend's house, Zepp's aunt discovered that her home had been robbed. The intruders had taken away many valuable items, including the same pager with the unknown message from her nephew. Therefore, the woman could no longer find out what the text contained. It is noteworthy that the police experts who worked at the crime scene could not find any fingerprints or even any clue that would indicate the identity of the burglar. It is quite possible that the thief acted in gloves, leaving no traces. Thus, the investigation reached a dead end, and no substantial information about Zepp's fate could be obtained. The case remained unsolved, and the young man was considered missing for a long 15 years. However, the investigators were convinced that it was Robert who was involved in his disappearance and most likely killed his friend. The situation changed radically only in 2015, when Robert was arrested on charges of murdering the married couple. During a thorough search of his home, police stumbled upon a strange find. Under a thick layer of concrete, they discovered a cavity containing solid fragments of organic origin, as well as particles of fabric and skin. Such a method of getting rid of physical evidence seemed extremely suspicious. The detectives instantly realized that these findings could shed light on the mystery of Zepp's disappearance, as it was quite likely that the discovered remains could belong to him. All the physical evidence was removed from the suspect's home and sent for examination. In addition to the mysterious bones, several other items were found that attracted the attention of investigators, in particular, a plastic bag with a white powder of unknown origin. Later, an examination showed that the substance was quicklime. Important testimony was also obtained from one of the detainees' relatives. He recalled that in the winter of 2000 or a little later, Robert was burning some garbage on his property, which emitted an extremely pungent and unpleasant odor that even then seemed extremely strange to the witness. Soon after, a concrete platform appeared in the same place, which did not fit into the overall landscape of the yard at all. When asked by neighbors, the owner replied that he planned to arrange a pond for fish farming, but this idea was never realized, and later it was completely forgotten. However, it is worth noting that it was under this platform that the police discovered the aforementioned cavity with the mysterious bones. The results of the forensic examination confirmed the worst fears of the investigation. The remains did indeed belong to Zepp Quinn, who had disappeared 15 years earlier. The case of the young man's murder was moved from a dead point, and on April 27, 2017, Robert Owens appeared in court on charges of committing this and other serious crimes. The defense of the defendant immediately began active attempts to justify the actions of their client and mitigate his guilt. The lawyers argued that Robert had mental disorders and problems with an adequate perception of reality caused by taking strong painkillers that a doctor had once prescribed for him. Moreover, in order to combat the side effects of these drugs, the man was prescribed even more medications, which ultimately only exacerbated his mental disorders. All this, according to the defenders, led to irrational behavior and the inability to fully control his own actions. In addition, the defense emphasized that the defendant suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, Due to such a line of Robert's lawyers, he could well have been found insane and sent for compulsory psychiatric treatment instead of a real term behind bars. So when the court session had been going on for more than 2 hours, the prosecutors decided to compromise and offer the accused a plea bargain. According to this agreement, the charges of first-degree intentional murder were removed from Robert, and instead, he was only charged with 2 episodes of second-degree murder and robbery. Thus, the defendant actually avoided responsibility even for the death of Cristie's unborn child. Robert decided to accept these terms and fully admitted his guilt in the crimes charged against him. In the end, the court passed a sentence 74 years in prison with the right to parole no earlier than 60 years. When the defendant was given the last word, he addressed the families of his victims with assurances that he deeply regretted what he had done. Robert claimed that he was not really a bad person, and the deceased were his friends, whom he did not wish any harm at all. He said that it was all a tragic accident, nothing more. However, none of the defendant's excuses found a response from those present at the hearing. His version of events seemed completely absurd and implausible. Even if we take at face value the story about the accident and the unintentional double running over of the couple, Robert's subsequent actions raised many questions. After all, there was a possibility that the accident victims survived and needed immediate medical attention. However, instead of checking their condition and calling an ambulance, the man simply took the battered bodies home and cold-bloodedly mutilated them there. For his part, the medical examiner who worked on the case expressed doubts that the nature of the injuries of the deceased corresponded to the version of events voiced by Robert. True, given the poor preservation of the remains, the specialist could not reconstruct the circumstances of the couple's death with 100% certainty. The defendant himself could not in any way explain what motive prompted him to commit such cruel and inhuman acts. His belated apologies did not make any impression on the relatives of the murdered and did not make them soften their position. The families of Cristie and Joseph did not hide their indignation and righteous anger. They wanted the killer to suffer behind prison walls until the end of his days, and after death, he would forever end up in the flames of hell. Their desire was not surprising, because even seasoned law enforcement officials called this crime one of the most chilling and disturbing in the entire history of their service in this small town. Despite the fact that the perpetrator of the tragedy was finally behind bars, the case did not end there. Detectives continued to work on the mysterious disappearance of Zeb Quinn, aiming to bring a new charge against Robert in this case, which had been in the archives of unsolved crimes for 15 years. In 2018, the defendant finally made an unexpected statement. Robert assured that he was not involved in the murder of his 18-year-old friend. At the same time, he revealed new details to the investigation that allegedly shed light on the true circumstances of that chilling event. According to Robert, Zeb's disappearance and death were orchestrated by his own uncle, Walter Gene Owens. The man allegedly personally developed a plan to rob and kill the trusting young man. To lure Zeb to the place of the massacre, the uncle, together with Robert, enticed the love-struck boy to the Uwharrie National Forest under the pretext of meeting his girlfriend Massey. It was probably a message about this date that Zeb sent to his aunt's pager shortly before his disappearance. However, at the appointed place, the deceived Romeo was not met by the embraces of his beloved, but by 2 armed men with criminal intentions. As Robert claimed, it was his uncle Walter who shot Zeb with a .22 caliber hunting rifle without hesitation, in order to deprive the boy of the opportunity to resist or seek help from the police. After that, the uncle allegedly mutilated the body into parts and then burned the remains. In this horrific story, an eerie analogy was clearly traced. Both relatives, it seems, got rid of the bodies of their victims in the same way. This detail only heightened suspicions about Robert's leading role in these atrocities. However, the defendant continued to insist on his own non-involvement in the murder of his friend. He said that only under pressure from his uncle did he become an unwitting accomplice in concealing the traces of the crime. Moreover, Robert assured that if the cops carefully examined the crime scene in the national park, they would surely find physical evidence that would confirm his testimony. The police officers immediately went to the specified area, but despite all their efforts, they could not find a single clue. Apparently, over the 15 years that had passed, natural processes and wild fauna had destroyed almost all possible traces of the bloody drama. Law enforcement officers failed to find even the used cartridges from the weapon mentioned by Robert at the scene. Of course, the most logical step in this situation would be to turn to Walter Owens for explanations, but unfortunately, this opportunity was lost forever. The uncle died of a heart attack back in 2017, so no one could confirm or refute Robert's testimony anymore. It seems that the investigation into the circumstances of Zepp's death reached the same dead end as the case of the murder of the Coat couple. Prosecutors who did not believe this latest version of the hardened criminal eventually decided to make a deal with the investigation. On July 25, 2022, Robert was offered to plead guilty to first-degree intentional murder of Zepp in exchange for leniency. The defendant accepted the terms of the agreement and, according to the verdict, received an additional 13 years in prison, which was added to his current term. Since then, Robert Owens has continued to serve his sentence in the Federal Correctional Institution in Madison County, North Carolina. Taking into account the fact that this unscrupulous criminal is the only witness to the deaths of 3 innocent people, it is quite likely that we will never know the whole truth about their deaths. However, for the general public, law enforcement officials unequivocally state that it is Robert Owens who is responsible for these terrible crimes, and he alone is guilty of what was committed. Abigail White was a true internet star with an army of devoted fans. For several years, the girl had been successfully earning money on a popular site by sharing her revealing photos. Despite Abby openly talking about her happy relationship with her boyfriend, a horrifying reality was hiding behind the perfect image, which eventually came to the surface. This stunning story took place in 2022 in the city of Bristol in the southwest of Great Britain. Bristol is a large port city with a population of over 400,000. Interestingly, it's the only city in the country where the well-being of residents is on average higher than in all of Britain. It would seem to be an ideal place for a carefree and happy life. But even in such prosperous regions, horrible events sometimes occur that shock the entire community. It was here in Bristol that Bradley Lewis was born in March 2000. The boy grew up in a friendly and loving family. His parents, Steve and Rachel Lewis, were wonderful people for whom family always came first. Bradley had been a good-natured and cheerful boy since childhood. Like many of his peers in England, he was passionate about soccer from a young age and dreamed of becoming a professional player. While studying at St. Stephen's School, Bradley actively played for the local soccer team. He had many friends and buddies. As a teenager, he started going to parties, where at the age of 14 he met 15-year-old Abigail White. At the time, it seemed like a typical teenage infatuation that would pass with time, as with most peers. But who could have imagined what tragedy these seemingly innocent relationships would lead to? Bradley and Abby seemed like the perfect couple, young, beautiful, in love. But despite the outward idol, their personalities and life experiences were strikingly different. While Bradley grew up in a loving family and was surrounded by care and understanding from childhood, Abby had been through real hell and carried the burden of psychological trauma. The girl's family life began to fall apart when she was only 2 years old. Her parents constantly quarreled and even got into fights in front of their little daughter. When Abby turned 4, they finally divorced, and her mother took the girl to live with her. But not for long, soon a stepfather appeared in their life who turned out to be a real domestic tyrant. The mother's new husband not only abused his wife, but also raised his hand against little Abby. To somehow protect her daughter from this nightmare, the woman made the difficult decision to send her to live with her grandparents. So at the age of 4, the girl lost not only her father, but also her mother, finding herself being raised by elderly relatives. Of course, such traumas could not but affect Abby's behavior. At school, she constantly got into trouble, quarreled with teachers and classmates. Studying was difficult for her, her grades were low, and the threat of expulsion was very real. When the girl turned 13 at the insistence of the school administration, she was sent for a consultation with a psychiatrist. The specialist found a whole complex of psycho-emotional disorders in the young patient that required serious correction. As a detective with experience, I have often encountered similar cases. Unfortunately, children who have experienced domestic violence or separation from their parents often grow up troubled and unstable. They need a special approach, understanding, and patience from adults. But unfortunately, not everyone receives proper help and support in such a situation. Apparently, Abby also did not have enough resources to cope with her demons. Despite all the difficulties, she tried to stay afloat and not give up. Perhaps that is why she so desperately clung to Bradley, a guy who promised her love, care, and security. But will this young couple in love be able to build a strong relationship despite all the trials of fate? You will find out the answers very soon, but I really want it to be those of you who right now subscribe to the channel, like this video, and write any comment to it so that this material can be seen by as many people as possible. This is very important for the social consciousness of society. Despite all the efforts of doctors and the prescription of antidepressants, Abby's life did not undergo cardinal changes. But at the age of 15, she met Bradley Lewis, and it seemed that a ray of light had finally appeared in her fate. The young man graduated from school, obtained a flooring specialist qualification, and started working, building his own future. Abby, on the other hand, chose a different path. Instead of looking for a permanent job or getting an education, she discovered the OnlyFans site for herself, a platform where authors can share content with their subscribers for a separate fee. And although this service can be used for various purposes, it is most famous thanks to models who attract fans with revealing photos. It was this kind of content that Abby began to create. Under the pseudonym Mitzi Lewis, the girl actively published her spicy photos, calling herself a fake Barbie. Her popularity grew rapidly, and with it, her income. In just 1 year, Abby managed to earn an impressive £50,000 sterling, over $60,000. It seemed she had finally found her niche and could count on a cloudless future. But was this success real? Could a girl who had suffered from psychological trauma and lack of love all her life find happiness in this way? And how did Bradley, who was used to completely different values, react to her choice? All these questions haunted those who knew Abby and her story. As a person who has repeatedly faced similar situations, I can say that quick money rarely brings true satisfaction, especially if it is obtained at the cost of one's own dignity and self-respect. Very often, behind outward success lies an inner emptiness and pain that cannot be filled with likes and subscriptions. Perhaps this is what Abby felt, despite her popularity on OnlyFans. Maybe deep down she understood that she had chosen the wrong path, but did not have the strength and courage to get off it. Or maybe she just didn't see any other way out, because she was used to the fact that life is a continuous struggle for survival. Be that as it may, the story of Abby and Bradley is still far from over. Whatever happens next, one thing can be said for sure. The path Abby has chosen does not lead to true happiness and harmony, and only by realizing this can she change something in her life. And just in case, I don't condemn OnlyFans so that you don't think anything for yourself there. I just think that in this case, it's inappropriate, in my opinion. And what do you think about this platform? Share your thoughts in the comments. It seemed that Abby had finally found her calling and could count on a carefree future. But already at the beginning of the second year of her career on OnlyFans, the situation changed dramatically. New models who registered on the site every day provided serious competition for the fake Barbie. Abby's popularity was rapidly melting away, and with it, her income. If in the first year the girl earned an impressive £50,000, in the second year it was only $12,000. Abby found herself facing the threat of a financial crisis. Meanwhile, the girl's family life was becoming increasingly difficult. At the time of the decline in her popularity on OnlyFans, Abby and Bradley already had 4 children. Although the details about their gender and age were kept secret, it is known that Abby gave birth to 1 child from another man. The young family huddled in a small house, and Bradley had to work a lot to provide his loved ones with a decent existence. Fortunately, Bradley's parents always supported the young couple and took an active part in raising their grandchildren. This was a real joy for Abby, who often posted happy family photos on social networks. But behind these idyllic pictures hid a completely different reality full of conflicts, resentments, and misunderstandings. Abby and Bradley's relationship had never been easy or cloudless. Over time, the girl began to have problems with alcohol and drugs. She often came home in a state of heavy intoxication, which could not but affect the atmosphere in the family. Abby herself vehemently denied having a serious addiction, blaming everything on fatigue and stress. As a psychologist, I often encounter similar cases. Unfortunately, people who have experienced psychological trauma in childhood often seek solace in alcohol or drug. It gives them the illusion of control over their own lives and helps them escape from painful memories. But in reality, such behavior only worsens the situation, destroying not only health, but also relationships with loved ones. It seems that this is exactly what happened to Abby. Instead of seeking professional help and working on herself, she chose the easiest path, self-destruction. And Bradley, who was used to traditional family values, simply did not know how to react to such behavior from his beloved. He either tried to support her or broke into shouting and accusations, which only deepened the gap between them. Gradually, their marriage turned into a battlefield, where everyone strove to prove their rightness and defeat the other. And the children suffered the most from this, growing up in an atmosphere of constant conflict and tension. And although outwardly Abby and Bradley's family looked quite prosperous, in fact it was cracking at the seams, threatening to fall to pieces at any moment. Abby masterfully played the role of the victim, complaining to everyone around her about her boyfriend Bradley. Supposedly, he was horribly controlling her, cheating left and right, and she couldn't live because of his cruelty. And although close people knew the true value of these accusations, the girl did not stop, painting herself as an unhappy martyr in the paws of a despot. But if only Abby had looked in the mirror, she would have seen there the real tormentor of this relationship. Because in reality, it was she who was having an affair on the side, not shunning any means to fulfill her whims. Moreover, she even managed to get pregnant by her lover and give birth to a child, whom she forced Bradley to recognize as his own. Lies, it seems, were as necessary for Abby as air. Meanwhile, Bradley's friends were sounding the alarm, begging him to run away from this madwoman before it was too late. "Dude, she's a complete psychopath. You're like a thing to her that she can twist however she wants," they whispered in fright. But the boy, madly in love, stubbornly refused to hear anything, hoping by the power of his love to turn Abby into an angel. But can you cure someone who has no intention of recovering? This is the question that haunted Bradley's mother, who could barely hold back her tears as she watched her son suffer. Every humiliating remark from Abby, every contemptuous look of hers struck right into the woman's heart. And somewhere deep down, she understood that this story could not end well. And she looked into the water, as they say. In the end, the quarrels and noise in the young family reached such proportions that social services had to intervene. From now on, Abby was forbidden not only to live with Bradley, but even to approach him. The boy had to pack his bags and move back in with his parents. But did this mean the end of their relationship? Or maybe just the beginning of a new act in this drama? As a seasoned detective, I have foreseen many similar stories, and I will say frankly, they rarely end with a happy ending. Such toxic bonds cling too tightly, the poison of manipulation and violence penetrates too deeply. And to break out of this vicious circle, you need extraordinary strength and determination. It would seem that the ban on seeing each other should have put an end to the toxic relationship between Abby and Bradley. But no way. The crazy girl simply could not leave the boy alone. Every day she literally terrorized him with calls, demanding that he return home for at least one night. And Bradley, as if hypnotized, time after time succumbed to these persuasions, neglecting basic safety measures. Meanwhile, Abby discovered a new way of self-affirmation for herself: social networks. With relish playing the role of a wronged single mother, she shot TikToks where she poured a ton of dirt on Bradley. And although virtual does not always correspond to reality, trusting viewers willingly swallowed this simple sentimental bait. In her tirades, Bradley turned into a real monster, soulless and a pathological liar. You can only get the truth out of him by interrogating him all night. Abby complained tearfully in one of her voice messages to a friend. And then a real bombshell. "He says I need a psychologist. Like otherwise, one of us will definitely end up dying. And you know what? I believe I'm capable of killing, even if later I have to rot behind bars." And probably to prove the seriousness of her intentions, on March 19, 2022, Abby decided to prove it. During another furious quarrel, the girl grabbed a knife and thrust it straight into Bradley's hand with a knife. The wound turned out to be no joke. The boy had to urgently rush to the hospital in order not to bleed to death. As a detective with considerable experience, I will say frankly, they do not joke with such statements. If a person has once crossed the line and allowed themselves to resort to violence, they will do it again. The only question is when the next outburst of aggression will happen and how serious its consequences will be. Unfortunately, Bradley was in no mood for abstract reasoning. Having patched up the wound, he continued to reach out to Abby like a moth to a flame. The boy simply could not believe that his beloved was capable of real atrocities. He forgave her all her madness time after time, hoping that a miracle would happen now and the girl would come to her senses. But the miracle did not come. Instead, the relationship between Abby and Bradley increasingly resembled a fierce game of cat and mouse. They either quarreled until they were hoarse or fell into each other's arms, as if trying to make up for lost time. And above their heads, like the sword of Damocles, hung the ominous shadow of the knife that so mercilessly plunged into Bradley's body. Bradley decided to cover for Abby when the doctor inquired about the origin of the wound on his arm. "I just bumped into something at work," the boy lied, not wanting his crazy girlfriend to get into trouble with the police. But after this incident, even he, hopelessly in love, realized it's time to run away from this madwoman, no matter what joint children they have. But no way. As if enchanted, Bradley reached out to Abby again and again, ignoring all the warnings of social services. And here, just 6 days after the knife incident, Thursday, March 25, 8 p.m., a chilling scream comes from the house where the White Lewis family lived. Abby, sobbing, begs for help, demands to urgently call an ambulance. The neighbor is the first to rush to the alarm, thinking that someone has fallen ill. But when the frightened Abby mutters something about her Bradley no longer breathing, The woman rushes to the White Lewis house to see with her own eyes what is happening there, and the picture that opens up is enough to make one faint on the spot. Everywhere you look in the corridor, in the living room, dark, ominous blood stains. But the real horror awaited in the kitchen. Right in the middle of the room on the floor, Bradley lay on his back, pale, motionless, clearly unconscious. And on the windowsill, a bloody knife stuck out carelessly, a silent witness to some terrible drama. The dumbfounded neighbor, numb with fright, dials 911 with trembling hands. A moment later, her husband bursts into the kitchen and freezes, struck by what he saw. What happened in this house? Why is Bradley lying motionless in a pool of his own blood? And most importantly, whose hands so mercilessly plunged a knife into him? All these questions swarmed in my head as the sirens of the ambulance and cops wailed, and something suggested that the answers to them would turn the life of not only the White Lewis family upside down, but also of everyone who even caught a glimpse of the abyss of their toxic relationship. Abby, trembling like an aspen leaf, was muttering something about some accident, begging me to believe that she had nothing to do with it. But how could one believe the word of a girl who was used to lying right and left? A girl who just a week ago admitted that she was capable of murder? The answer is obvious. Of course not. As an experienced detective, I know perfectly well. People with a dark past rarely change. And if they have once crossed the line of what is permitted, then they will almost certainly do it again. Simply because they are used to living by the laws of the jungle, where the strongest and most brutal survives. It seems that it was this primordial thirst for blood that pushed Abby to the fatal act. Unable to withstand another quarrel or simply going crazy with jealousy, she grabbed a knife and stabbed her beloved in the back, literally and figuratively. Or maybe it was all completely different. Maybe Bradley, driven to despair by constant reproaches and humiliating treatment, dared to fight. That fateful evening, Abby once again gave free rein to her demons. At the bar, she kept knocking back shot after shot, completely losing control of herself. Drunk and furious like a witch from a fairy tale, the girl swore at the staff and visitors, not mincing words. It seemed that she had completely forgotten about decency and common sense. Meanwhile, Bradley and his friend Ryan slipped into the bathroom, where the boy, unable to restrain his emotions, burst into tears. Through sobs, he confessed that he dreamed of running away from Abby as far as he could see, but he was afraid because his psycho girlfriend had threatened to take her own life if he left her. What a trap, my friends. Neither to run nor to stay. While the boys were sharing revelations in the men's room, Abby managed to get into trouble. Having been rude to one of the visitors, she earned a slap in the face and even fell to the floor. It's good that her friend picked her up and led her aside, otherwise they would have had to gather the beauty in pieces. When Bradley and Ryan returned to the table, an unpleasant surprise awaited them. Abby, without thinking twice, threw a glass of cocktail in her beloved's face and began to scream that he did not stand up for her honor. And when Ryan tried to calm his friend down, she spat right between his eyes. That's some lady, I tell you. At 7:30, the couple was already rumbling home in the car of their old friend Alfie, whom they had met at the bar. The guy said that all the way Bradley and Abby were gnawing at each other like rabid dogs, and as soon as they drove up to the house, the girl jumped out of the car and rushed inside, as if all the demons of hell were chasing her. Bradley sat with his friend for a few more minutes, as if anticipating something. As a farewell, he uttered an ominous phrase, "I will die when I return home." Alfie shuddered at these words. They sounded too creepy. Just in case, he left Bradley his number so that he could call if anything. Having said goodbye to his comrade, the guy went to meet his fate, and she was already waiting for him on the threshold, wicked as 100 devils and with a knife in her trembling hands. During a quarrel, Abby did stick the blade into her beloved's chest, and in just 20 minutes, the neighbor was already calling 911. A finale worthy of a Shakespearean tragedy. When the detectives began to study Bradley's cell phone, an unpleasant discovery awaited them. It turns out that over the past months, Abby had been bombarding the guy with hundreds of messages with threats, and so terrible that I'd better keep silent so as not to disturb your imagination. Before the trial, Abby was examined by a whole bunch of psychologists. Their verdict was disappointing. The girl has a borderline personality disorder, because of which she is not able to control her emotions and outbursts of anger. In addition, a few days before the massacre, Abby experienced a double stress, an abortion and the news of Bradley's new passion. No wonder she lost her mind. But at the time of the commission of the crime, she was in a completely healthy state. But despite all the diagnoses, the jury was relentless. After deliberating for 12 hours, they unanimously found Abby Gale White guilty of premeditated murder. The sentence is life imprisonment with a right to parole in 18 years. That is, this Missy will be released no earlier than 2040, when she turns 41. What a perspective. And while the killer is in prison, Bradley's family is picking up the pieces of their lives. The father admitted that the loss of his son was the most terrible tragedy for him, and the mother still carries this pain in her heart. But at least they can count on the support of the community. Hundreds of caring people came to Bradley's funeral. The soccer club where the boy kicked the ball even held a charity match and transferred part of the proceeds to the Lewis family. And the former coach, with tears in his eyes, recalled Bradley as a bright and sincere child, the true pride of his parents. As for Abby, she lost everything: her beloved children, freedom, future. And this is probably the most terrible punishment for a woman who with her own hands destroyed what others would give their lives for. But will she understand her guilt? Will she atone for her sins? Who knows? One thing is certain: this bloody story will still fester hearts for a long time, reminding us of the price of jealousy and unrestrained passions. So be careful, my friends. Take care of yourself and your loved ones, and may you never have to find yourself on the other side of the protective glass, either in the courtroom or in a prison cell. Because life is the most precious gift, and to exchange it for some emotions or grudges is a crime that has no justification. With this, our eerie tale comes to an end. Thank you for being with me all this time and living every moment of this drama. I hope it made you think and maybe take a fresh look at some things. This story is about a love quadrangle, manipulation, and murder. Someone from this group will die, and experts will call it a crime. On May 13, 2005, investigators visited a house on the outskirts of Olympia, Washington, in search of a woman named Michelle Linehan. She was a successful individual with a master's degree in public administration and worked for the Washington State Ethics Board. In addition, Michelle was involved in charity work. At first glance, her personal life seemed perfect: a loving doctor husband and a beautiful daughter. But why were investigators from faraway Alaska interested in her? As it turned out, the reason was a decade-old murder that took place in the city of Anchorage. And as it became clear, Michelle Linehan had quite an interesting past, which we will now learn about. Michelle Linehan, named Michelle Hughes, was born in New Orleans. She was a bright and ambitious girl with big dreams. At the tender age of 16, Michelle decided to leave her hometown and go to New York City, aiming to build a career as a model. In the big city, she found a job, but her earnings did not meet her expectations. That's when Michelle realized that she needed to radically change her life, find a new job, and marry a wealthy man. But first, it was necessary to get a higher education. To save money for tuition and find a potential husband, in 1994, Michelle moved to Anchorage, Alaska, and got a job as a dancer in a club. Why did Michelle choose Anchorage to earn money and find a husband? The fact is that in the 1990s, commercial fishing was thriving in Alaska, and new oil fields were opening up. The city attracted businessmen, fishermen, and oil industry workers who had a lot of money and could afford to spend it on a charming young girl. At that time, Michelle was only 21. As we can see, Michelle was a determined and goal-oriented person, ready to take risks to achieve her goals. But will this approach to life pay off? Michelle wasn't the best dancer at the club, but she managed to earn a decent starting capital in a few months. She received from $1,000 to $3,000 per night, which made her the most in-demand girl in the establishment. But what exactly did Michelle do? You might think of something indecent, but no. She simply sat with clients in revealing outfits and had conversations with them. In my opinion, this approach to work looks rather dubious, but who am I to judge? In October 1994, a new client appeared at the club Kent Leppink. He came to Alaska with the intention of engaging in commercial fishing. After meeting Michelle, Kent became her regular visitor. They spent hours in private conversations. Before leaving for Anchorage, Kent's parents gave him a considerable sum of money, which he spent on the charming Michelle without hesitation. Their relationship developed rapidly, and just a month after they met, Kent proposed to the girl. Interestingly, he did not tell his parents about Michelle's real profession. And here's what Kent's mother, Betsy, said about his chosen one.
She didn't love him the way he loved her. I have a suspicion that there were other men in Michelle's life.
Well, a mother's heart is rarely wrong. Kent moved into Michelle's house, and everything seemed to be wonderful. However, the girl did not quit her job at the club. In December 1994, a traveling salesman, Scott Hilk, visited there. He immediately noticed the attractive young dancer. Things went so far that Scott also settled in Michelle's house and later proposed to her. Now there were 3 of them living under one roof: Kent, Michelle, and Scott. A strange situation, isn't it? You probably have many questions. How did the men feel about such cohabitation? It's very simple. Michelle told Kent that Scott preferred men and hinted to Scott that Kent was gay. Thus, they were not concerned about rivalry. Michelle continued to dance at the club as it brought in a lot of money, and she was not going to give up such an income, and the grooms, it seems, did not mind. In the summer of 1995, a widower named John Carlin Roman III came to the establishment. He had lost his wife to cancer and was single-handedly raising his teenage son, John Carlin Roman IV. Yes, the boy was named after his father. Michelle approached John's table and they met. Their communication lasted a long time, and in August, John confessed that he was going to visit Amsterdam. Michelle exclaimed, "I dream of flying there too." John offered to travel together, and the girl agreed. Whether this trip took place is unknown, but John fell madly in love with Michelle. Upon learning about her two fiancés, he said, "I loved her so much that I didn't care." Now, how do you understand that? Do men ever think with their heads and not with other body parts? This story gets more and more confusing and intriguing with each section. A love quadrangle, lies, manipulation, all this cannot end well. But let's not jump ahead and wait for the denouement of this strange case. But before that, my friends, a very important point: the creation of such content requires a lot of time, and now my channel and I are experiencing not the best financial situation. I will be endlessly grateful to you if you become a sponsor of this channel and support me with your donation. And in return, I will be able to personally respond to you in the comments and also mention your noble name in my video. So become sponsors. I will be immensely grateful to you. In November 1995, Michelle started a major renovation of her house. John, without much thought, offered her to move in with him for this period. By the way, Kent and Scott also moved into John's place, although Scott lived there only occasionally when he was in town, as his work involved frequent business trips. Just imagine this situation: Michelle, Kent, Scott, John, and his son all living in one big house under the same roof. It's a real love quadrangle. What an unconventional family, right? I can't even imagine how they distributed responsibilities and built relationships in this format. However, it's worth giving Michelle credit. She managed to find common ground with John's son. Moreover, she practically replaced the boy's mother. She helped, supported, and was always ready to listen. John greatly appreciated this attitude and tried in every way to thank his beloved. For example, he fully paid for the renovation of her house and gave her a luxurious fur coat. And for Christmas 1995, John proposed to Michelle. Thus, now our heroine had 3 fiancés who literally showered her with jewelry, furs, and even paid for her car. Isn't that a fairy tale life? When information about this story reached the public, many compared it to the plot of an American sitcom. No wonder. A woman lives under the same roof with 3 men. They even have a schedule according to which she spends time with each of them in turn. And now this trio is on trial for the murder of one of Michelle's fiancés. Is this even possible in real life? Apparently, yes. This case is a prime example of what tangled love affairs and living large can lead to. Damn it, this is not fiction. This is a real situation. I didn't make anything up. You can even Google it yourself and check. At the end of December 1995, Scott had to urgently leave on business for California. That's when he decided to break off his relationship with Michelle. John and Kent were over the moon with happiness. Here's how John commented on this situation. My relationship with Michelle began to develop rapidly as soon as she broke up with Scott. It would seem that finally harmony reigned in this love quadrangle. Kent even called his parents and told them that he and Michelle were planning to get married, so they should get ready for the wedding. Oh, if only they knew what would happen next. However, on Christmas 1996, the unexpected happened. Michelle and Scott reconciled. The girl began to fly to him in California, and when she returned to Anchorage, she stayed at John's house. Kent was living separately at this time, but periodically visited his lovers. Soon he calls his mother again and says that he and Michelle want to finally set a wedding date. "You see, Mom," Kent explained, "Michelle wants change. She wants a real family, children." What a twist, and this after all her affairs on the side. And so Michelle and Kent return to their own house and open a joint checking account. Kent even makes a will in which he names Michelle as the main heir. Moreover, he takes out life insurance for her for a whole $1 million. It is worth noting that Michelle herself refused to make Kent the beneficiary of her insurance policy. The man's parents were extremely dissatisfied with this arrangement. They did not understand why such a large insurance sum was needed and tried to cancel the policy, but to no avail, and Kent's brother, Craig, bluntly told him, "Do you realize that this is dangerous for your life? You're in the crosshairs." How prophetic those words turned out to be. You know, friends, this story gets more and more complicated with each section. Relationships in the love quadrangle are changing at the speed of light, and now there's $1 million insurance policy at stake. Something tells me this isn't going to end well. What's going to happen next? April 26, 1996 was supposed to be a special day for Kent and Michelle. They had set it as their wedding date. Kent's father decided to personally meet his future daughter-in-law and discuss the details of the ceremony. He came to his son, hoping for a warm meeting, but found only a confused and saddened Kent. It turned out that Michelle had simply packed her things and left. Kent was completely devastated, so his father decided to stay with him to support him in this difficult time. However, soon he had to return home to Michigan. He didn't even know that 2 hours later, Kent would send him and his mother 2 mysterious letters. Upon receiving the alarming messages, Kent's parents opened the first envelope. The letter said, "If something happens to me, open the second letter. But if the wedding with Michelle takes place, never open it." Frightened by such an ominous appeal, they immediately called their son, but he did not answer. It was decided to set aside the second letter for better times. On May 2, 1996, an ordinary service crew was heading to a remote communications tower near the town of Holb, Alaska. As the truck driver approached the facility, he noticed a red spot on the trail near the tower. Upon closer inspection, the man realized that it was a person in a red jacket lying motionless on the ground. It became almost immediately clear that this unfortunate soul was dead. An hour later, the police arrived at the scene, but there were no suspects at that time. Law enforcement officers thoroughly searched the area for evidence. Almost immediately, they managed to find spent cartridges. Examination showed that they belonged to a Desert Eagle .44 caliber pistol. Also, 2 different sets of footwear tracks were found at the crime scene. One track was left by the deceased man in red, and the other obviously belonged to the killer. A strange and eerie story, isn't it? A planned wedding that never happened, the mysterious escape of the bride, and then the murder of one of the participants in this love quadrangle. Moreover, the evidence found indicates that the killer was waiting for his victim near that tower. The only question is, who could it be? Could it be that someone from this company planned to get rid of Kent in advance? It's still difficult to draw any conclusions so far, but I feel that the investigation of this case will be extremely interesting and confusing. The police wasted no time and quickly identified the deceased. It turned out to be Kent Lepping. He had a driver's license, a checkbook, and an insurance policy on him. The most interesting thing is that just a few days before his tragic death, Kent for some reason changed the beneficiary of his life insurance policy. Now his father and mother were listed in this column. But here's what's strange for some reason. The police papers did not indicate who the previous beneficiary was, and you and I remember that earlier Kent had written Michelle there. A coincidence? I don't think so. The detectives decided to examine the checkbook more closely and found out that Kent had a joint account with Michelle. Having learned her address, they went to her house. On May 5, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the police knocked on the door and began to ask Michelle about the nature of her relationship with Kent. The woman replied that they were unique, so complex and confusing that words cannot describe it. She tried to explain to the investigators their strange love quadrangle, which they did not yet know about. "I already have a boyfriend, and so does Kent, but he and I am not a couple," Michelle stated. "Do you think this clarified anything?" "I don't think so either." Next, the cops were interested in where Michelle had been all this time. She said that she had only returned from California a couple of days ago, but she had gone with Scott to the lake, and that she hadn't seen Kent for a long time. By the way, Michelle didn't even know about his death. It was the police who informed her of this news. The woman seemed to have been replaced. She began to sob, and when she calmed down a little, she told the officers that Kent was not really her fiancé. They said the engagement was just a cover for his non-traditional orientation. That's the secret. At that time, the police did not yet have any leads or theories about this murder, but soon they will appear, and from an unexpected source. Meanwhile, Kent's parents were informed of their son's death, and without hesitation, they opened the second envelope with his deathbed message, and there was a bombshell. "Michelle, John, or Scott are the closest people to me who could have killed me. Do me a favor, put Michelle behind bars for many years." He named himself a suspect. Of course, the parents immediately informed the police about this letter and also told them about Kent's $1 million insurance policy. And only then did the investigators find out that Michelle, it turns out, was simultaneously engaged to 3 men, Kent, Scott, and John. What a twist. I don't know about you, but I like this story less and less with every minute. There are too many dark spots and understatements in it, and these strange coincidences with the change of the insurance beneficiary and Kent's deathbed letter. It cannot be otherwise. Someone from this foursome is hiding something. We can only hope that the persistent cops will be able to unravel this tangle of intrigues and gain justice for the deceased Kent. Having received such intriguing information, the investigators decided to visit Michelle again. They were interested in whether anyone had a motive for killing Kent, so they began to ask more specific questions about the insurance policy. And then Michelle revealed an interesting detail. It turns out that Kent's life was insured for a whole $1 million. It was she who paid the premiums for this insurance. In her opinion, such a large sum could become a serious motive for the crime. But the police never managed to find out whether Michelle knew about the change of beneficiaries in the policy. Her alibi was ironclad. On April 25, she went to Scott in California and returned only after Kent's murder. But can she be trusted? Meanwhile, the news of the police's suspicions reached Scott. The man was shocked and outraged. To clear himself of the charges, he agreed to take a lie detector test. And what do you think? Scott failed the test miserably. Unfortunately, we don't know what questions they asked him, but the detective in charge of the case noted that polygraph results are not always reliable. And in general, Scott wasn't even in Alaska at the time of the murder. It's only strange that for some reason the police did not bother to check the data on his flights and calls. They didn't follow through, in my opinion. In the end, the cops' attention was drawn to John. They visited him at home, but the man assured them that he knew nothing about the murder. However, Kent's car was parked near his house, and in the glove compartment, the investigators found a very interesting letter. They christened it the Note of Hope. In it, Michelle asked John not to tell anyone that she would be in some kind of house in the city of Harbor, Alaska, and she hinted that she would not be alone there. The main thing is that John should keep his mouth shut and not report this to Kent. Michelle herself claimed that there was no house at all. And to be honest, John really had no property near Hob. And what do we have? A $1 million insurance policy, a failed polygraph test, a mysterious note. It seems that each of this trio is hiding something. But which one of them still dared to commit murder? So far, there is no answer to this question. We can only hope that the persistent cops will be able to unravel this tangle of secrets and lies. And you and I will follow the development of events. Investigators suggested that Michelle deliberately left the note where Kent could see it. In this way, she wanted to lure him to Hob. And most likely, on the day of his murder, that's where he went. In my opinion, this is very similar to a pre-planned crime. But let's not jump to conclusions for now. Next, new information surfaces about that same insurance policy. Why did Michelle and Kent decide to take it out? It turns out that in February of '96, just 3 months before the tragedy, the couple in love met with an insurance agent. They told him that they were planning to take out a loan together to buy a fishing boat. And for this, they supposedly needed a life insurance policy. Moreover, both of them wanted to insure themselves for $1 million. But the agent explained that for such an amount, he could only insure Kent. As for Michelle, who was not going to work on the boat and was not yet an official wife, she could count on a maximum of $150,000. Something tells me that this insurance is the key to solving the murder. And not long before his death, Kent confessed to his lawyers that Michelle had been deceiving him. It turns out that she was stealing his things to make expensive purchases with his credit card. One of the lawyers advised Kent to break off the relationship immediately because Michelle was unlikely to change. They say she would continue to spend his money and dance in that club. A few days later, Kent told another lawyer, "I'm going to be killed." The lawyer urged Kent to stay away from his brides and Michelle, and if the threat was serious, to go to the police. But Kent seemed to have lost his mind because of love. He could not leave Michelle. And what did he do after that conversation? He changed the beneficiary of his life insurance policy. A strange coincidence, isn't it? After the investigation reached a dead end, John Carlin Roman III and his son John Carlin Roman IV went to New Jersey. By the way, John S.R. had already spent almost his entire $1 million in insurance payments, which he received after an injury at work. And the lion's share of this money he spent on Michelle, so he had only pennies left. Meanwhile, Scott broke off all ties with Michelle and returned to his ex-wife. And our mermaid, if you remember, who danced at the club, returned to New Orleans and entered university. Life went on as usual, and one day Michelle met Colin Linehan, a medical student. She immediately told him about her past. And you know what he replied? "The past is in the past. We live on." Words of gold, in my opinion. Ha ha ha, sorry. In the spring of 1998, Michelle and Colin got married, and the following year they had a baby girl. Later, Colin became a military doctor, and the young family moved to Olympia, Washington. Michelle took care of household chores and earned a master's degree. She was actively involved in raising her daughter and even helped out at a local volunteer center. 10 years passed and no one even mentioned the murder of Kent Lepping. But in 2005, the case was transferred to the newly created Department for the Investigation of Especially Serious Crimes. Detective Jim Stock became the lead investigator in this case. While reviewing the materials, he noticed one interesting fact. It turns out that many years ago, the police had interrogated young John Carlin Roman IV, the son of John Carlin Roman III. But since the boy was a minor at the time, the interrogation was conducted in the presence of his father. And now John Roman IV was already 27 years old, and he practically did not communicate with his father. Detective Stock decided that this was a chance to learn something new. Perhaps the young man would want to talk about those long-ago events. So Jim and his colleague went to Tacoma, Washington. And there, John Carlin Roman IV told them that his father had bought a Desert Eagle 44 pistol shortly after the family moved to Alaska. And the boy also saw how on the day of Kent's murder, his father was washing this weapon with bleach. Then John S.R. told his son that this was the best way to get rid of evidence. The investigators also sent Michelle's laptops and John's desktop computer for examination. This equipment was seized back then, immediately after the murder, but for unknown reasons it was not thoroughly checked. And so in the fall of 2006, the detectives presented all the collected evidence to the Alaska grand jury. And although there was no direct evidence, the prosecutors believed that this was enough to charge Michelle and John with conspiracy and first-degree murder. That's how things are, friends. Even 10 years after the crime, new leads appear. And now everything points to the fact that Michelle and John were indeed involved in Kent's murder. And that constantly changing insurance only heightened suspicion. It remains to hear the verdict of the jury. When John Carlin Roman III learned about the charges against him, he immediately flew from New Jersey to Anchorage. On October 4, 2006, the man appeared at the courthouse, ready to fight for his freedom. Meanwhile, detectives visited Michelle's home to arrest her. The door was opened by Colin, the suspect's husband, who said that his wife was not at home. The police issued an ultimatum. Colin had only an hour to bring Michelle to the station. And soon the woman, accompanied by her husband and lawyer, crossed the threshold of the police station. And within a few hours, she was already flying to Anchorage to meet her fate. In the spring of 2007, the trial of John Carlin Roman III took place. This high-profile case attracted the attention of the international press. The courtroom was filled with journalists and members of the public. No wonder, because in the dock was a young and attractive doctor's wife, who moreover was simultaneously engaged to 3 men. Everyone was interested in the spicy details of her personal life. How did she manage to live under the same roof with 3 suitors and at the same time make love with each of them in turn? But now she and one of her fiancés were facing severe punishment for the murder of Kent Lepping. The prosecutor built his case on the fact that Michelle allegedly persuaded Kent to take out a $1 million insurance policy and name her as the beneficiary. And then John Carlin, in a prior conspiracy with the insidious beauty, killed his rival. They say the couple in love planned to share the insurance payout and live happily ever after. But their dreams were not destined to come true because before his death, Kent had time to change the beneficiaries to his parents. By the way, the prosecution claimed that Michelle and John borrowed the idea for the murder from the movie The Last Seduction. It also told the story of a treacherous woman who persuades her lover to get rid of her husband for money. The lover ends up behind bars and the beauty runs away with all the money. Something very familiar, isn't it? John Carlin's lawyer tried to convince the jury that her client was only a victim of Michelle's manipulations. They say this sly fox seduced the unfortunate man and then cruelly got rid of Kent in order to appropriate his wealth. And what about Michelle herself? She denied everything and accused young John Carlin Roman IV of the murder. This version was also supported by Scott Hilk, another ex-fiancé of the defendant. However, the most incriminating evidence was provided to the court by none other than John Carlin Roman IV. The young man told how on the day of Kent's murder, he saw his father diligently washing the weapon with bleach. They say Dad even explained to his son then, the best way to get rid of traces is to thoroughly clean the gun with chemicals. True, John Sorna's lawyers stated that the boy was a capricious teenager with a difficult character who hated Kent and could have killed him himself. But the nail in the coffin of the defendant was the deleted emails that experts recovered from Michelle's laptop. In them, John wrote to his beloved about scandals and quarrels, threatened Kent, and showed crazy jealousy towards him. Sometimes these letters were somewhat vague and incomprehensible. For example, on March 17, 1996, 2 months before the murder, Carlin wrote to Michelle, "I'll call you as soon as I have them." The prosecution saw this as a hint at insurance documents. On March 31, Michelle herself mysteriously told Scott that she was expecting a cash flow soon, although she did not explain its source. And a week before Kent's death, John assured Michelle, "Everything will be fine, honey. Just wait a little longer and your life will change dramatically for the better. You'll see." The prosecutor emphasized that Michelle was obsessed with the desire for money and did not disdain any methods to obtain it. John, on the other hand, was obsessed with Michelle herself and was ready to carry out any of her orders. The jury deliberated for 2 days. On April 3, 2007, they finally announced their verdict. Guilty. John Carlin Roman III was sentenced to 99 years in prison. True, he was granted the right to parole, but he will be able to use it only after 33 years, at the age of 82. That is, in fact, it is a life sentence. In the fall of the same year, Michelle also appeared before the court. The girl was counting on a more successful outcome because the main evidence was collected against her former lover, not against her. But witnesses were found who dug deeper. A former colleague of Michelle's from the strip club said that they had watched that infamous movie, The Last Seduction, together. And then Michelle allegedly said that she would not mind being in the place of the main character of the film. Scott Hilk, for his part, suggested that it was the young John Carlin Roman IV who could have shot Kent. They say the boy himself boasted to him on the phone that the murdered man had been shot in the stomach, and this at a time when neither the press nor Michelle nor Carlin SR knew the details of the crime yet. So where could the young man have learned such details? Most likely he himself was present at the scene of the massacre. However, despite all the efforts of the lawyers, on October 22, 2007, Michelle was also found guilty of first-degree murder. The judge aptly remarked that there is no difference between the puppet that pulls the trigger and the puppeteer that pulls the strings. The defendant was sentenced to 99 years in prison. One could end this eerie story here, but fate had its own plans. Shortly after he began serving his sentence, on October 27, 2008, other prisoners brutally dealt with John Carlin Roman III. Such a sad finale for a loser lover. True, after his death, the heirs began a legal battle and still managed to overturn John's sentence, citing indirect evidence of his guilt. Michelle's relatives also filed an appeal. They argued that the judge of first instance made a fatal mistake by admitting inadmissible evidence into the case testimony about the movie and Kent's deathbed letter. After all, the defense had no opportunity to interrogate the deceased and clarify the context of his message. And what does some thriller have to do with it? In the end, the Court of Appeal agreed with this and overturned Michelle's sentence for lack of evidence. What an unexpected twist. 2 former lovers suspected of a brazen murder are set free. Who could have predicted this? But despite the tragic nature of this story, it seems that Michelle managed to start life from scratch. Now she lives in Seattle with her loving husband Colin and daughter, working as a laser technician in a clinic. To her credit, Michelle did not even demand compensation for her wrongful imprisonment. The story of a love quadrangle that led to a horrific murder has finally ended. It intertwined passion and jealousy, greed and cold calculation. And despite the numerous evidence, we still do not know for certain who was behind this crime. Perhaps someday the secrets of the love quadrangle will be fully revealed, but it will happen without our participation.